As he spoke, I scanned the documents. The first thing that caught my attention was a discrepancy between the accident report and the photos showing damage to the car and the injuries sustained by Mrs. McCarthy. The report states she was driving alone when the accident occurred on Interstate 95 as she was entering Jacksonville from St. Augustine. It seems Mrs. McCarthy lost control of her vehicle at high speed and crashed into a power pole. Wilson tapped his fingers on the smooth table, a small smile creeping onto his face as he glanced from Bailey to Wilkes. I could sense the tension rising. Both men looked worried. If you look at the photos of the car's damage, you'll see that most of the impact was on the right front, not the driver's side, which you typically expect in a head-on collision with a pole. It seems the driver tried to swerve to avoid the impact. Most of the damage from the crash was on the right passenger side. I sent the information to 2 different accident experts, and they both agreed there's no way Mrs. McCarthy could have received her injuries if she was driving the car, he continued. She must have been in the passenger seat during the accident. Bailey scoffed. I'd argue that just shows you've talked to 2 unreliable so-called experts. I'm not an expert on accidents, Wills added, but I've handled enough cases to envision several ways a driver could sustain those injuries. In any case, what does this matter for our conversation? I motioned to Wilson to continue as I stole another glance at Deirdre. She appeared uneasy, trapped with no escape. I felt my silent thoughts were clear to her. You shouldn't have lied. If you had come to me honestly, we could have worked this out much easier. Wilson leaned forward, hands clasped together as if trying to exude sincerity. Since it seems quite clear that 2 people were in Mrs. McCarthy's vehicle, I started to wonder why the police report didn't mention a second person. I spoke with a few contacts and learned from a police communication official that the accident was initially reported as involving 2 individuals, but within a few hours, any mention of a second person seemed to disappear. Mrs. McCarthy was taken to Baptist Medical Center with no record of another patient from an accident at the same time, he continued. I checked other hospitals and discovered that a man named Julian Gutman was admitted to University Medical Center around the same time. Interestingly, he had injuries that appeared to match those caused by an airbag deploying on the driver's side. Wilson looked from Bailey to Wills, struggling to hide a smile. Normally, when someone is injured in an accident, there's a police report, but for some reason, I couldn't find any report on Gutman's accident. The only reason I can think of is that someone went to great lengths to ensure no reports were filed, likely to protect those involved. This suggests a lot of influence, considering any exposure. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the implications of his words. The air was thick with tension as we all sat in silence, each of us processing the gravity of what was unfolding. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew that what we were discussing could lead to serious repercussions for the officers involved. Unless the instructions came directly from me, things could spiral into a major political debacle. For once, Bailey and Wills were unusually quiet, perhaps recognizing the weight of the situation. And just so you know, Julian Gutman is the man who had a problem with the 17-year-old girl, I added, my voice steady. That incident caused quite a rift in his family. After her father was out of the picture, he wormed his way back into her life. I tried to catch Deirdre's gaze, but she remained averted, lost in thought. It didn't matter, there was no denying the gravity of the situation. I glanced around the room, my frustration boiling. There's not much doubt about who was involved in that mess, is there? I asked pointedly. Or what they were doing behind the scenes to keep Gutman's name out of the headlines? Careful, you're walking a fine line here, Wills warned, his voice measured. These aren't public figures. Even suggesting our firm is involved in any wrongdoing could land you in a heap of legal trouble. I couldn't help but chuckle at his caution. If I didn't know how skilled Mr. Wilson is as an investigator, I might be concerned. But whatever he digs up will be solid. So let's hold off on the legal threats for now. Mr. Wilson, please proceed. Yes, sir, Wilson replied, his demeanor calm as he continued. I've gathered enough information about Mr. Gutman's injuries and learned more about Miss McCarthy's condition, details that aren't in the medical records. I spoke with the nurse who treated Miss McCarthy, and she mentioned some unusual aspects of her injuries. The room fell silent as Wilson paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Miss McCarthy had facial injuries and quite a bit of blood, but the nurses noticed another substance on her face during treatment, which they tested. Deirdre's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. I turned to Wilson, my heart racing. Did the nurses have any idea how that substance got there? There was some speculation, Wilson said coolly, but ultimately, no one could reach a clear conclusion. It's possible Gutman was with someone else before the accident. I'll let you gentlemen figure out what the medical staff thought about that. He flipped through another set of documents, and I felt a sense of urgency rise within me. Mrs. McCarthy's security team uses GPS trackers in all her vehicles to protect against threats like kidnapping. These trackers aren't public information, but by chance, I was able to access the data. It shows that two individuals spent time at Neptune's Cave, a lounge on St. Augustine Beach. Wilson smiled slightly, clearly enjoying how this information was likely ruffling Bailey and Wills. He had a knack for uncovering details he wasn't supposed to. I found witnesses who saw both of them being very close at that place for several hours. They were seen leaving together, looking quite tipsy, and heading back to Jacksonville, where Mrs. McCarthy had bought a condo for Mr. Gutman. That's enough, Bailey interjected, silencing the room. We've discussed how none of this can be proven. Besides, it doesn't matter for the divorce. I won't say whether Miss Lancaster had a relationship with Mr. Gutman. If she did, it wouldn't change anything. Cheating isn't taken seriously anymore when it comes to child custody and support issues. He reached over, taking Deirdre's hand gently. There may be differing views about her memory loss, but regardless of opinions, it doesn't change her wish for a divorce. So, even with all these additional issues you've brought up, the main question remains: how can we dissolve this marriage smoothly? I don't want a divorce, and I'll fight as hard as I can to keep my wife from being with someone I think so little of, I declared, my voice firm. Is it worth the money you'll have to spend just to annoy your ex-wife? Bailey shot back. Money won't be a problem for me, I replied, meeting Wills's knowing look. So you're considering taking advantage of your ex-wife because she has money? In a marriage of just 2 years, where they spent most of their time apart, it's unlikely there would be a significant settlement. No, I just want what's fair, I insisted. If Deirdre insists on this divorce, what do you think is fair? Wills asked, his tone skeptical. He knew better, but a good lawyer had to act convincingly, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. Yes, Mr. Wills and Mr. Bailey, what is fair? The real reason we're here today. I leaned forward, determined. We can keep circling around this issue, but let's get to the heart of the matter. If you already know why we're here, why all this talking? Bailey's expression was one of confusion mixed with irritation. I wanted to see if she could look me in the eye, if the girl I once knew still had a conscience. Now I see the answer was clear. Both Teller and Wilson watched me closely, their interest piqued. They had done their part, but they didn't know my true objective. I feel like I walked in on a movie halfway through, Wilson remarked, his curiosity evident. Do you mind? I asked Bailey. He shrugged, dismissing my question. This meeting isn't really about Deirdre wanting a divorce or my refusal. I've always believed her claims of memory loss were false. I would have easily agreed to a divorce if she wanted one, but now, given her situation, I doubt she would go for it. How could you tell? I shot back, frustration creeping into my tone. For a moment, Deirdre looked directly at me, and I caught a glimpse of the woman I once knew. It's simple, Deirdre, I said softly. When I came back, you acted surprised as if you didn't know me at all. You knew who I was, people must have shown you my picture. But you insisted you had never seen me before. Your father told me when he first asked me to take care of you that you had a huge crush on me when you were a teenager. I didn't notice you, but I know you remember." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. I had laid bare my feelings, hoping she would see the truth of who we were together. The room felt charged, a battlefield of memories and desires, and I knew this was just the beginning of a fight that would change everything. "You noticed me. You might not remember our dates or our marriage, but you couldn't have completely forgotten the guy who was your early crush. When you acted as if I was a stranger, it hit me hard. I realized the memory loss wasn't genuine." From that moment on, it became a quest to uncover the truth, to dig deeper and find the clues that would lead me to the answers I desperately sought. I turned back to the legal team gathered around the table. Feeling the weight of their scrutiny, I stood up and began pacing. At first, I struggled to understand why Dira would choose to pretend to have amnesia. As you pointed out, I couldn't stop her from divorcing me if she truly wanted to. And honestly, Dira, once I discovered you were involved with someone else, I would have set you free. I moved behind Dira, my hands resting gently on her shoulders. She tensed but didn't flinch. The younger lawyer with silver hair began to rise, but Bailey quickly shook his head, signaling for him to remain seated. "It's fine, Matt," I reassured him, squeezing Dira's shoulders slightly. She still wouldn't look at me, but everything changed when I learned it was Gutman you were with. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. I understood why you might concoct a story about memory loss. It was a clever ploy, albeit ineffective. It showcased your creativity. I figured it had to be your idea since Gutman wouldn't have come up with something like that on his own. I usually enjoy mystery stories where the detective gathers everyone to explain the case, Wilson said, furrowing his brow. I noticed some of Bailey's team looked equally puzzled. "I really don't understand what's going on," I admitted, feeling the tension in the room thicken. My attempt to comfort Dira by standing behind her and resting my hands on her shoulders was falling flat. I felt a connection to her, an emotional tether that made it hard to keep my hands still. "It's because you don't know the full story, Wilson," Bailey interjected, his voice steady. "The important thing is that Mr. Lancaster was concerned about their marriage. He established some legal guidelines that both parties had to agree to. Essentially, for every year they were married, Dira would receive $1 million. After 10 years, they could end the marriage, but the money would still be there for her. However, if she were unfaithful, she would owe Michael a staggering $10 million right away. If they ended the marriage for any reason before the 10th year, he'd still get the $10 million. The room fell silent, the mention of a $10 million payout hanging heavily in the air. Such a hefty penalty for divorce was likely meant to safeguard his daughter from opportunists who only sought her wealth. But not for Dira. She had always been financially secure, and I knew she wouldn't think twice about paying it if it meant finding happiness with Gutman. The atmosphere shifted. Julian Gutman, coming from a modest background, surely viewed $1 million as a fortune. The thought of me walking away with $10 million that could have been his must-have infuriated him. I could feel the gears turning in my mind. This was all just a scheme to keep me from receiving the $10 million Lancaster intended for me. Dira must have made choices to keep her new partner satisfied, and the thought of what else she might have done to maintain that arrangement troubled me deeply. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Knowing you did all of this for him hurts the most." Without turning or making any movements, she replied softly, "Let go of me, Michael. Just let go." I relaxed my grip and stepped back, sensing the tension radiating from Matt. I wondered if he had a history with Dira, but Lancaster had told me that when she was with Gutman, she paid attention to no one else. Perhaps this was just a simple act of kindness. She had always been the type of person others wanted to support. I was slightly taller than Matt, and though he was a lawyer, I sensed he could hold his own in a confrontation. I stepped back, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. "How does Miss Lancaster's supposed memory loss change anything in your opinion?" Bailey asked, his tone calm but with an underlying edge. This had shifted from a search for information to a confrontation where they now knew what I knew. Wilson leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Hey, I'm just an outsider here, but even I can see that Lancaster was a man of strong faith, just like you, Mr. Bailey. The McCarthy couple was married in a Catholic church, officiated by Monsignor Gerald Alcott. I know you don't get the head of a Catholic diocese for many private weddings, so he must know the Lancaster family quite well. I could see Bailey's expression shift slightly, but he masked it quickly. I'm not Catholic, but I've worked on a few divorce cases involving Catholic couples. The church is strict about divorce, but there are exceptions. Annulments can be granted for various reasons. They aren't easy to obtain, but the church does allow them. If Mrs. McCarthy were to approach the bishop with her story, claiming a very brief marriage with no children, where she supposedly forgot everything from the past 3 years and no longer recognized the man who wanted to share his life with her, he would at least be willing to hear her out. Maybe, Bailey conceded, a smile creeping onto his face that I didn't trust. But gentlemen, even if you think my respectable firm would employ such underhanded tactics, what about the regular courts? Mr. McCarthy could take this matter there, and Catholic rules won't hold much weight in that setting. I noticed Bailey's smile again, a sly expression that hinted at his confidence. I suspected he didn't often lose and wouldn't admit that his firm would act justly to give me what Lancaster had intended for me. If Gutman returns to your daughter's life, why do I feel like you're not genuinely concerned about my plans? You're observant, Wilson replied to his partner, a hint of admiration in his tone. Smart too. Orion here is sharper than he looks. He may seem tough, but he has the cleverness to make oil ink grow even more. Turns out he was right, I muttered under my breath. Did you know this was a trap, Mr. McCarthy? A trap? The tension in the room escalated as I processed the implications of his words. The stakes were higher than I had imagined, and I realized that every decision I made from this moment on could change the course of our lives forever. We wanted to find out what you know, what actions you've taken, and what you might do next, Bailey said, her voice calm but commanding. We thought you'd be more open in a relaxed setting. Now that we've learned what we needed to know, we can start the real conversation. So, go ahead. She gestured to Teller and then to Wilson. You two are no longer needed. McCarthy, why don't you let them leave? I don't think so, I replied, standing up from my chair. The air in the room shifted as I felt the need to take control of the situation. I walked down the length of the table, leaning casually against its polished surface. Let's recap, I began, my voice steady. You believe my wife is pretending to have forgotten things after a serious car accident. You have a psychiatrist who agrees with you. But we believe Miss Lancaster suffered a genuine and serious brain injury in that tragic accident. Bailey's eyes narrowed. Nobody would willingly put themselves through such pain for a lie, especially one they didn't need in the first place. She pointed to Wilson. You hired a private investigator who found information that questions Miss Lancaster's side of the story about the accident. But you can't prove anything regarding what actually happened or the actions of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. You can show she was with Mr. Gutman while still married to you, but setting aside your feelings, what's the legal significance of that? I felt a surge of frustration. Her relationship with Mr. Gutman is allowed. It's common for people to change their feelings about love. She clearly isn't looking to get back together with me, and she'll do everything within her power, alongside us, to ensure I don't receive the $10 million mentioned in the marriage agreement. Bailey rubbed his bald head, a contemplative gesture. Does that sum up the situation? Yeah, mostly. But you missed the most important point. I will receive that $10 million no matter what legal tricks you try to use to change the prenup. You're going to lose. Bailey stepped closer, his demeanor shifting as he leaned in, ready to challenge me. For a man in his 60s, he was surprisingly fit. He turned to his team and signaled for an older woman with dark hair to approach him with a document. Thank you, Marge. As she left, I noticed a connection between her and Bailey, something more than just professional. It was nice to see that life could still hold excitement, even in the later years. He handed me the document, his expression serious. This is an agreement that allows you to relinquish any claim to the $10 million in exchange for a $250,000 payment. You can sign this today, Mr. McCarthy, and get the $250,000 right away. Miss Lancaster can finalize her divorce without contest in a month, allowing both of you to start over. I couldn't help but smile slightly, though I quickly suppressed it. You think I'm foolish? Why would I agree to this? Because you won't have any other choice. He moved to the center of the room, his gestures grand as he emphasized his points. You mentioned at the start of this meeting that you feel outmatched. Remember how you compared yourself to General Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn? That actually fits your situation. You're outmatched and unprepared for the legal challenges ahead. I crossed my arms, trying to maintain my composure. I know I'm right. That has to count for something. Bailey shook his head. This shows your inexperience. Court cases are won by the stronger party. Compared to Miss Lancaster, your position is very weak. You're going to hurt my pride if you keep talking like that. This isn't funny. Think about this, he continued. Your assets are only about $35,000. You had almost $75,000, but medical bills and fees have taken a lot of that away. Miss Lancaster, with her wealth and full ownership of Oil Incorporated, is worth around $150 million. You do not have a lawyer right now. There are at least 50 people working on Miss Lancaster's case, while you have just one investigator. No matter how skilled he is, our team has 10 investigators scrutinizing every part of your life and marriage. I felt a sinking sensation in my gut as he laid out the facts. You might believe that since you are currently Miss Lancaster's husband, you can access her money, but that's not true. We have successfully kept you from obtaining any of the estate's funds. Any support a judge might grant you will be locked away until the case is resolved. This could take a long time to sort out. We will work hard to keep this case open for as long as we can. And we will seek an annulment, he added, his voice steady. We'll end the marriage based on issues like mistreatment and conflicts. The divorce will be entangled with so many legal matters that it will take a long time to resolve everything. Before long, you'll find yourself running low on money for investigators and legal help. You will face losses, lose the $10 million, lose your marriage, lose your representation, and possibly even your freedom. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. I can't wait to hear what awful things I supposedly did to my wife. I stood up, the frustration boiling over as I walked around Bailey. When Matt tried to stop me, I pushed him aside harder than I intended. I reached for the back of Deirdre's chair and turned her to face me, desperation gripping my heart. I guess I never really knew you, Deirdre. I thought you would fight for us. But to turn on me like this. You would go this far to assist someone who has hurt you? It's a good thing your father isn't here to witness this. It would break his heart. Just sign the papers, Michael. We're finished. Take the $250,000 and leave my life, Deirdre urged, her voice steady but laced with pain. Will stepped up behind me. Michael, you've been misled by what you see in movies and TV shows. The courtroom isn't just where the truth comes out. It's a battleground. Bailey added, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. We will flood you with legal motions and paperwork. We will bury you. Lawyers will come at you one after another, and you won't be able to keep up. We will break you. Bailey stood behind Deirdre, placing his hands on her shoulders where mine had been just moments before. And that's not all, Michael. We. The words hung in the air, a weight that felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I was in a fight for my life, and I wasn't ready to give up. It's not fair, Bailey began, his tone accusatory. Deirdre has shared how you mistreated her from the very first night her father entrusted her to you. We have statements from her friends confirming that you acted aggressively when they tried to help her. What chance did she stand against someone like you? The tension in the room thickened, and I could feel the weight of their accusations. You scared her into staying quiet, Bailey continued, his voice rising. You made her worry that her father would judge her harshly if she spoke up. She admits she has spirit, but she didn't want to upset her father with the false stories you told about her." He glanced at Deirdre, then at the group of men and women gathered around the table. "I'm sorry, Deirdre. I know you didn't want anyone to know these hard truths, but it's important for Michael to see just how far you're willing to go to end this marriage." "Why did you marry me, Deirdre?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "Why would you stay with me for 2 years if I'm such a bad person?" Deirdre stood up, her confidence radiating through the room. For a moment, I almost believed her claims of coming from a strong background. "Because you have shown unsettling behaviors, Michael McCarthy. Even after my father got involved, you told me if I didn't marry you and let you take charge of my father's company, you would find Julian and hurt him. And I believed you." Her words struck me like a slap. I understood her strategy, but it still pierced my heart. "Just sign the papers and end this," Wilkes urged from behind me. "You're not just facing money troubles, there are still legal matters that could become complicated." "Isn't it complicated already?" I shot back, feeling cornered. "It could get much worse, Michael. Don't let this go any further." Wilkes placed the papers on the desk and set a sleek pen next to them. "Sign it, Mr. McCarthy. You know what to do. You're skilled at your work. You've already lost your wife. You can take $4 million and start over or keep fighting and complicate your life even more. It's a simple choice." Teller had been watching quietly, a hint of amusement playing on his lips as he pulled something from his pocket that looked like a mint and popped it into his mouth. "Mr. McCarthy, I won't tell you what to do. It's your decision. But it's clear this meeting was set up to rattle you, to make it hard for you to think straight. The goal is to overwhelm you." Beside him, Wilkes raised a finger, trying to get my attention. "I'm not a lawyer, McCarthy, but I know that wills and prenups are tough to challenge, especially when they involve substantial sums of money. These papers were drafted by someone who might try to contest them, so they may have an advantage. Bailey and Wilkes will need to tread carefully because lawyers could face serious repercussions for their actions." Bailey chuckled, as if the thought of consequences amused him. "Your friends are not lawyers, Michael. You should listen to someone with years of legal experience. Not signing would be the worst mistake of your life." I stood before the group of lawyers he had gathered, feeling like a gladiator facing a coliseum full of spectators. They were imposing, and I could sense the seriousness in the air, so the smile on my face must have puzzled everyone. Wilkes and Bailey exchanged uncertain glances, and Deirdre watched me closely, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. After 2 years of knowing me, she could tell trouble was brewing. She tensed in her chair, but there was no escape. "Mr. Bailey, Mr. Wilkes," I said, my voice steady. "You are right that my 2 friends here are not lawyers. I'm not a lawyer either, and I don't have anyone to represent me. But I do have someone helping me in a way. He's working for free. I won't have to pay him anything, but he knows his stuff. Let me give him a call." I picked up my phone and dialed a number, not needing to explain anything further. Within 30 seconds, several phones in the room began ringing. Bailey and Wilkes shot up from their chairs, the atmosphere shifting dramatically. "Mr. Bailey, Mr. Wilkes, the police are downstairs," an officer's voice crackled over the line. "They're telling everyone to stay in their offices. They've arrested Mr. Stevens, and they're coming up the elevator." Bailey and Wilkes signaled for their staff to calm down, panic flickering across their faces as they hung up their phones. Bailey shook his head, his bravado faltering. "I don't know what kind of trick you're trying to pull, McCarthy, but you're playing a dangerous game. I'll take care of whatever lawyer you have coming here. I've supported Sheriff Knight for a long time. I've backed all his campaigns. When I tell him about his officers being involved, there will be consequences." Footsteps echoed in the hall, growing louder as the door swung open. 1, then 2, then a third deputy from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office strode in, followed closely by Mr. Harper Stevens, his hands bound behind him and flanked by another stern-looking officer. The last to enter was a casually dressed man who slipped in quietly, his presence unnoticed by most as they focused on the law enforcement officials. While the majority of the staff watched the officers intently, Bailey, Wilkes, Matt, and the other lawyers kept their eyes on the short man who had just entered. He didn't look like someone to worry about if you had bad intentions. His clothes were nice, but his white shirt strained around his belly, with gaps between the buttons. His hair was a dull brown, and the heavy stubble on his face made him look like someone who had forgotten to shave. He was just as you'd expect from someone called a child of the Black Irish, with his thick stubble and unkempt appearance. His name was William Maitland, the second prosecutor in the state attorney's office for the 3rd Judicial Circuit, and he was my secret advantage. "Maitland," Bailey said, surprise flooding his voice. "What's going on here?" "Hello, Mort," Maitland replied coolly. "I could ask you the same question." "What do you mean?" "I've never seen so many people from the legal field in one room outside a meeting with free snacks. You barely had enough staff downstairs for us. I had to leave some officers behind to keep them from getting lost." "Maitland, this isn't a joke," Wilkes snapped. "You can't just barge in here." "Right, Mort," Maitland replied, a wry smile creeping onto his face. "This is very serious." As the tension crackled in the air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Finally, the tide was turning. The lawyer's expressions morphed from smug confidence to wary concern, and I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. "This is a serious matter," Wills repeated, his tone barely masking the tension in the room. "Come on, Wills," I said, trying to inject some energy into the atmosphere. "You need to engage here. Just echoing my words isn't going to make this more exciting. You've always liked being in the spotlight, but this time, you've taken on more than you can manage." Maitland smiled slyly, as if he knew something we all didn't. "Oh, Mort," he said, feigning innocence. "I thought you liked me." Bailey snatched a phone from the table. "Give me your boss's number, Mond. If you're still at the state attorney's office tomorrow, I'll be amazed." "Mr. Edwards is in Tallahassee today, busy with meetings," Mond replied. "But I have his number. You might want to call him." Bailey dialed the number, then hit the speakerphone button so everyone could hear. "I want this on speaker so we can all hear what you say." "Hello?" came a voice on the other end. "I only have a moment, I'm getting ready for a meeting." "Dallas, it's Mort Bailey." "Oh, hi Mort. I hope we can talk about this later." "No, we need to discuss this now. Are you aware of what Mond is doing in my office?" "No, but I know why he's there. He mentioned he received some worrying information about your firm and planned to clarify a few things with you." "Worrying information?" He interrupted an important meeting in my office. "I didn't expect this from your team. I've supported your office since it started. I've promoted your work among my peers. I've donated a lot of money over the years for your campaigns and have never asked for anything in return. I deserve better than this. I appreciate your support, Mort. You've been a friend for years, and I value that friendship. But I can't ignore the information Maitland shared with me. I'm sure you can resolve this. Please cooperate with Mond, he'll work with you. Now, I need to take another call. I believe everything will sort itself out, and we can meet for lunch one day next week when I'm back in town." A loud click cut through the tension in the room. "Mort," I said, "it seems your friend just put you in a tough spot." "I'm ready to take action," someone muttered, and Bailey and Will settled into their seats, looking a bit unsure. Bailey scanned the officers around the room. "You have the upper hand now, Mond, but that won't last. Dallas Edwards will regret what he's done today, and soon enough, you'll feel the repercussions too. I have connections, and the association in Tallahassee won't approve of your actions. Relying on Edwards for help won't cut it this time. I'm going to report misconduct, and you might be lucky if the outcome is just a warning." "Maybe so," Mond replied calmly, "but right now, let's focus on what's urgent. He pulled out a chair beside Teller and sat down, pointing at me. "A few days ago, Mr. McCarthy visited my office with serious claims. There are accusations of fraud involving $10 million and other serious matters. Mr. McCarthy, please play your recording." A thrill ran through me at the prospect of turning the tables. I hit play, and it felt good to see the expressions change around the table. I quickly glanced at Wilson, but his face was an unreadable mask. "Having someone experienced in a tough situation can really help, Deirdre," I heard on the recording. "There's no need to worry. I know this is hard for you. You were married to him for 2 years, so it's normal to feel some guilt. But you're doing well. Just keep claiming you don't remember those 3 years. Dr. Fairfax has written a report that backs up your story, and he's not likely to change his mind. We've managed to keep the accident report about Gutman under wraps, and there are no official ties to him." "I can't help it, Uncle Mort," Deirdre's voice crackled through the speaker. "I feel awful. It's difficult enough to do this just to stop Michael from getting $10 million. I begged Julian to let it go. We don't need it, but he insists on going through with it. Honestly, I think it's more about him disliking Michael because of our marriage than actually wanting the money. I believe he just wants to hurt Michael. And on top of that, I don't want to be part of the plans you're suggesting, accusing Michael of serious mistakes, confronting the people I was with, threatening me. None of it is true, and you know it. It's hard enough with what we're doing, but I can't send him to jail." "We won't have to do that," Mond assured her. "I don't plan on it, but we need to prepare the charges, and we have witnesses ready to back our story and testify if needed. But it shouldn't come to that. The goal of these actions is to avoid a court case. Michael isn't naive, he realizes the trouble we're prepared to bring down. He'll accept the settlement and walk away. I assure you, he'll walk away." I switched off the recorder, the room filled with an uneasy silence. "Solid plan, Mort, and it might have worked," Maitland said, "but he's determined and didn't simply give up." Bailey stared at the recorder on the table as if it were a bomb about to go off. "Are you serious, Mond? I might not agree with some of your methods, but I never thought you would go this far, an unauthorized recording of a private conversation? You're relying on an illegal recording? That's a problem and can't be used in court." "I know you're well versed in the law, Mort," I said, "and you're right. I can't use that recording in court. But remember, Anano v. United States from 1985. Someone involved in illegal activities has no expectation of privacy. You were definitely involved in things you shouldn't have been during that conversation. We might not be able to use it as evidence, but it is useful. The other benefit of unauthorized recordings, if we're not the ones making them, is that they can lead us to facts that can be used in court." Maitland pulled out his cell phone and pressed a button. "Bring in the necessary parties." Bailey and Wills exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. The tension crackled in the air as we all prepared for what was about to unfold next. Deirdre's eyes widened as Maitland spoke, a glimmer of hope sparkling beneath the overhead lights. I could tell she had never expected things to escalate to this point. A nagging question crept into my mind: how much had Bailey needed to persuade her to show up today? Ever since she had feigned memory loss, she had been mostly avoiding me, keeping her distance like I was a ghost from her past. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a tall, distinguished gentleman who looked like he had just stepped off the red carpet, Dr. Mayfair. He was followed by a younger man dressed casually in shorts and a t-shirt emblazoned with a quirky slogan. A uniformed officer peeked inside, but Maitland waved him off, directing Dr. Mayfair to take a seat at the center of the increasingly crowded table. Before he could lead Gutman to his spot, the young man, Deirdre's companion, nearly lifted one of the secretaries out of her chair to claim the seat beside her. They exchanged knowing glances, and then he leaned in closer. I had expected a friendly gesture, but what unfolded was far more intimate. A few heads turned, the air thick with disapproval, but most people quickly averted their eyes. When he pulled back, I noticed Dira's breath had quickened, a telltale sign of her discomfort. His gaze locked onto mine, and he smiled, a smug confidence radiating from him. It was clear he had claimed my wife's attention, and he wasn't going to let go easily. He was undeniably handsome, with long hair and a sparkling diamond stud in his left ear. A few female attorneys and secretaries couldn't help but steal glances at him, their curiosity piqued. If I played my cards right, I might get a chance to confront him about this whole situation. "Good afternoon, Dr. Mayfair," Maitland said cheerfully. "Are you having a tough day?" Mayfair, with his stylish long hair and dark glasses, looked every bit the part of a well-known doctor from a primetime television show. He had a way of making people feel comfortable enough to share their secrets, but today, he seemed different, heavy with unspoken burdens. He didn't even notice Maitland's friendly greeting. His eyes darted nervously between Wills and Bailey, revealing a clear anxiety. "Mr. Bailey, Mr. Wills, I'm sorry," he stammered, his words tripping over one another. "I didn't have a choice. They said I was going to prison. I had to say something." "I don't care what you told them," Bailey replied, his voice sharp. "Your report was honest, and we didn't interfere. I understand you felt pressured, but if you signed those papers under duress, you might be in serious trouble. The first rule in a legal crisis is to stick to the truth," Maitland added, his tone unyielding. "You seem adept at dodging questions. It almost feels like you're hiding something. I don't want to leave the impression that you're a nice guy." "Do what you will, Maitland," Mayfair retorted, his voice steady. "You may have a recording and a disputed statement, but that won't be enough to take me down." "I disagree," Maitland shot back. "The challenge you're facing isn't as simple as you think. Your perspective as a civil attorney is narrow. From where I stand, holding someone accountable shouldn't be difficult. We can use the tape to convince hesitant witnesses about their best interests. The document signed by Dr. Mayfair will help us dig deeper into your actions, phone calls, and the people involved." Bailey stood, his confidence renewed after a brief pause. "You're used to dealing with shady characters, Maitland. If this is all you've got, gather your team and leave. And for heaven's sake, free Mr. Harper Stevens." Maitland turned to a nearby officer, who appeared to be Hispanic. "Stu, if Mr. Bailey doesn't sit down and be quiet, please escort him to a chair." Once Bailey reluctantly returned to his seat, Maitland approached the silver-haired attorney, "Mr. Henry." "Matt, could I speak with you for a moment?" Henry and Bailey exchanged glances before Henry stood and followed Maitland to a quieter corner of the room. "Matt," Maitland began, lowering his voice, "I try to keep track of the lawyers in my area, even the civil ones. I've heard good things about you. You're smart, hardworking, and skilled. That's probably why Mort and Wills picked you. They don't choose just anyone." Henry smiled slightly, taken aback by Maitland's unexpected praise. "Why do I feel like you're about to give me some advice I don't want?" "I'm not here to mislead you, Matt. I'm genuinely trying to help you avoid a tough situation," Maitland replied, sincerity shining through his words. "I'm not sure how much you know about the plan to take money from Mr. McCarthy, but I believe you must know something. You seem to be a significant player in this. Most other lawyers are too busy with their work or lack the experience to take risks." Maitland's tone turned serious. "The secretaries and assistants are anxious and uncertain about their roles in this, but if you speak up, the entire plan could unravel. People see you as an important figure here, which gives you a voice. If you provide trustworthy information, you could avoid any charges and protect your reputation. You'd be seen as someone who stood against wrongdoing. While local firms might hesitate, my boss has numerous connections, and your honest actions will be recognized in future references." Henry's brow furrowed, and he glanced at his superiors for support. "I appreciate your offer, but I believe the case against Mr. Bailey and Wills isn't strong. I don't have any knowledge of any unethical or illegal actions from this firm, so I can't help you." Maitland ran a hand through his thinning hair, staring down at the floor for a moment before lifting his gaze. I value loyalty, and I respect anyone who does what's right when it matters. But among all those qualities, loyalty is what I treasure most, even if it's misplaced loyalty to causes or people who don't deserve it. He bit his lip nervously, his expression serious. I respect you, Matt, but before you make a final decision, please just take a moment to think. That's all I ask. Just listen to me for a bit. As the weight of Maitland's words settled in the room, I could sense the shifting dynamics. Loyalties were being tested, and the stakes were higher than ever. Each word seemed to hang in the air, heavy with potential consequences, and I knew this was just the beginning of a storm that would change everything. You know that Bailey and Wills, along with possibly the other partners, are about to face serious consequences. They might act tough, but once the evidence piles up and the tide starts to turn, people will always turn against them. They always do. Bailey and Wills are in their 60s, and most of Wills's kids are already grown. For a crime like stealing $10 million, they probably wouldn't serve more than 5 years. They have enough savings to live comfortably, even if they never work again. As for Dira Lancaster and her boyfriend, they might slip through the cracks and avoid jail time, though I would do everything in my power to make sure they faced justice, because the brunt of this falls on them. Even if they spend a few years in a safe haven, Dira will still walk away with a staggering $150 million when they're released. This will be nothing more than a small setback for her. But you, Matt, this could be the end of the line for you. At just 32 years old, you're not married and have maybe $500,000 to your name. Legal fees will eat away at that sum quickly. It's likely you'll be found guilty, just as I believe they will drag you into this mess, just as surely as the sun will rise tomorrow. You'll lose your license. No reputable law firm will want to touch someone who has faced these serious charges. Not even the lesser-known firms will take a chance on someone with that kind of baggage. He stepped back from Henry, allowing the gravity of his words to settle in. I looked around the room, nobody spoke, and all eyes were fixated on them. Maitland scrutinized Henry carefully. "You're a handsome young man, Matt," Maitland said, chuckling at Henry's startled reaction. "Take it easy, Matt. I'm not implying anything else. I'm just stating a fact. You're at an age where you're likely interested in dating. There's a good chance someone will win your heart one day, and you might start a family. If you're like most men, you'll want the best for your wife and kids. That's typically how it goes. As a lawyer on the rise, you could provide your family with a good life, one filled with opportunities for travel and quality education. But as a disbarred former inmate, you'll still want the best for them, yet you won't be able to offer what you can now. If you choose to stay loyal to your bosses, you're not just throwing away your life, you're sacrificing your family's future too. You're giving everything up for people who will walk away without facing any real consequences." Maitland stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. It was clear he was much shorter than Henry, but the weight of his words hung heavily in the air. "Just think about this. This is the biggest choice you will ever make, and it will shape your future. Matt, think it over carefully." The two men remained in their positions for a moment, then Henry stepped back, shaking his head as if trying to clear unsettling thoughts. "I've heard stories about you, Maitland. I always thought you were impressive, but I feel like you're wasting your talents on me. I still don't understand anything about fraud or how someone could steal $10 million. He turned away from Maitland and returned to his chair at the table, visibly frustrated. Maitland shook his head slowly before walking back to where Bailey was seated. "I don't know how much you're paying him, Mort, but it's not enough." He scanned the table, ensuring everyone understood. "I know everyone here heard that talk. The same offer applies. Step forward, and you can leave without charges. No trial, no stain from all of this. But that offer only lasts so long. Wait too long, and this chance will disappear. Henry, that includes you too. It won't be long before this deal is gone." I scanned the room. Though I wasn't a lawyer or an expert at interrogation, I had been involved in enough high-stakes discussions to know how to read people. The air was thick with tension as everyone considered their next moves. I doubted anyone would step forward in that moment, but I sensed it wouldn't be long before someone reached out to Maitland's office. Gutman held Dira's hand tightly, his smile replaced by a serious expression as he contemplated the gravity of their situation. Even with Dira's support, he found himself in a precarious position. Our eyes met, and there was a silent understanding between us. I nodded slightly in response, but it was Dira's grip that kept him anchored in his seat. Their connection was strong, yet it felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing a crucial piece. I shifted my gaze back to Bailey and Wills. They appeared composed, but today was unfolding in ways they hadn't anticipated, nor had I hoped for. Maitland seemed to reach a decision. He signaled to an officer named Stu. "All right, Mort, if you won't even consider a plea deal, let's move on. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Stu stepped forward, cuffs at the ready. "I can't believe you're making this mistake," Bailey shot back, his voice rising. "You're taking us out in handcuffs for what? This is how it all ends. It's sad to see a career end like this, and yours will end here. I've already alerted the news, a traditional perp walk is perfect for the 6 o'clock report." Finally, Bailey turned around, offering his hands behind him in surrender. "You're being unreasonable, Maitland. You always have been." Maitland looked at the floor for a moment, then raised his gaze to me and finally to Bailey. "That's disappointing, Mort. I was hoping you'd plead for mercy, but your stubbornness puts me in a tough position." Maitland took a seat at the table near me. "Stu, the rest of you wait downstairs. Grab some coffee or something. We might still have to take some people in. Grove, you can take Mr. Reeves downstairs. If he calms down, consider taking off his cuffs too." "What's going on?" I asked, confusion creasing my brow. Before Maitland could respond, Harper Stevens pushed his hands further back. "Mr. Bailey, may I have a moment with him?" Members of Special Forces often exuded overconfidence, but one SAS member could easily handle 5 of them. "Maitland, please, give me 5 minutes with him," Grove urged. "The only thing SAS members are known for is their publicity," Maitland replied coolly, "but they aren't particularly effective in real situations. The only reason you're speaking now is that my..." As the cold metal of the handcuffs dug into my wrists, I glanced at Officer Grove, my frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "Do we really have to discuss this now? My hands are cuffed. It's not exactly the best time for a heart-to-heart." The burly officer exchanged a knowing look with Maitland. "I offered to help you out, Mr. Maitland, because you've lent me a hand before, but I'll deal with him one way or another. Let's keep this civil, gentlemen." Maitland stood his ground. "Why should I do anything for you, man? You're acting all strange and controlling. What are your plans here?" "You'll understand soon enough," Officer Grove replied, his voice low but firm. "If these two start throwing punches, it could end badly for both of you. If your guy lays a finger on mine, I'll have to report it, and I'm sure his family won't take kindly to that." "Well, if my guy hurts yours, he's facing serious charges," Maitland shot back, his tone taut with tension. The two big men locked eyes for a moment, the air thick with the threat of violence. Then, Stephen Harper broke the silence. "There are stairs in the back. If you take me that way, someone might trip and get hurt, just an accident. If anyone can't continue or gets knocked out, the fight is over." "Agreed?" Maitland nodded reluctantly. "Let's leave then. Is that okay with you, gentlemen?" "You don't need our permission for that," I muttered, watching as they strolled out, casually chatting like old friends. For a moment, everyone in the room leaned in, straining to hear what was happening just outside the door, but the world beyond fell silent. I turned to Maitland, my frustration mounting. "What's going on here? This feels like a bluff, and we're both putting on a show. You know this is nonsense." His gaze was steady, but I could see the worry behind his cool demeanor. "Your career is almost over, McCarthy." "Not quite," he said, glancing at me. "I understand your reasons, but it's not worth it." I felt the weight of his words. Maitland was smart, but he'd never walked in my shoes, never felt the crushing weight of betrayal that had come crashing down on me since Deirdre Lancaster's accident. "You're the luckiest guy I know," Maitland said, his voice tinged with envy. "And you too, Wilkes. You might avoid serious legal troubles and the end of your careers because the guy you tried to cheat out of $10 million still loves his wife." I couldn't help but notice the way Deirdre's piercing gaze felt like a needle, digging deep. Meanwhile, Gutman's smug grin made my fists clench as I fought to hold back my anger. "So this was all an act?" "You have nothing," I shot back. "Don't celebrate just yet. We have Dr. Fairfax's statement and the evidence he provided. We still have court orders, and we can prevent any documents from being destroyed while we prepare our case. You'll have some of your staff working with us. I can easily hold you responsible." Maitland chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Getting convictions won't be the problem, McCarthy. You're the problem." I studied him closely. He was a man with a solid reputation, an average-height fellow in his 40s, with thinning hair and a bit of a belly. People often underestimated him, but I had never taken him lightly. I had made sure he was on my side. Now, though, he looked less than pleased. "You've really complicated everything, McCarthy," he said, shaking his head. "Why couldn't you just report the illegal actions of this firm and let the law handle it? You could have gained justice against your unfaithful partner and walked away with some cash." Maitland took my tape recorder, holding it up for everyone to see. "The recording we're hearing today is just a copy. All versions we have are copies. McCarthy has refused to give us the original. This means any good defense lawyer can easily challenge its authenticity. We can't use it in court, and Dr. Fairfax's testimony could be dismissed too, especially if he hesitates to cooperate." He waved a piece of paper, an email, in front of me. "Look at this. McCarthy, you're really in a tight spot here. Just last month, you sent a message to a friend abroad. 'I wish I was with you in China right now. My life has taken a turn for the worse. I know that Deirdre is being unfaithful with someone from her past. She's made up some story to avoid connecting with me and is trying to end our marriage. Most of the time, I feel angry and frustrated, but sometimes I think our marriage may never have had a chance. Maybe it was meant to fail from the start, and maybe that's my fault." The room grew quiet as he read my words aloud. "I've never told anyone this, but that night I helped her after something upsetting happened. I took her to a safe place, and we talked. I brought her home. What I never told her or anyone else is that I needed to make sure she was okay. When she lay there, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I thought I didn't like that kind of person, but the longer I looked, the more drawn I felt to her. Afterward, I acted like nothing happened. I don't know if she's ever truly believed me." Maitland tossed the paper onto the table, his frustration palpable. "The truth is, I made a serious mistake that night. Whatever way you want to see it, it was a big breach of trust. Now that we're married, I care for her, but she's seeing someone else. I wonder if a relationship that starts with such a big mistake can ever really work." Bailey leaped up in surprise. "Your victim is a dishonest person, and you plan to use him against us. Do you see how ridiculous that sounds?" "It's not ridiculous," Maitland replied, shifting his gaze between me and Deirdre. "It's sad. When he came to me." But I couldn't let him finish. Anger surged through me, fueled by the betrayal and the secrets that had come to light. This wasn't just about money or legal battles. It was about love, trust, and a future that now hung by a thread. As the meeting unfolded, I shared my plan, one that aimed to shake my wife and her legal team. My hope was to pressure them into handing over my $10 million and letting me walk away. But I wasn't prepared to go all in just yet. That was why I hadn't provided them with the original tape, Nor did I show them the email. Normally, I would go after him as a hostile witness and drag the rest of them into it, but he had played his cards well. The wiretap might eventually be struck down in court, but it was too crucial to the case. Even if the judge excluded it, its shadow would loom over the trial. The news would inevitably leak out, and the defense attorneys would hammer him for recording without consent. If I didn't act, they'd take their complaints to the governor and claim I was biased. While the accusations didn't directly tie into this case, Mrs. McCarthy was already poised to say he had hurt her, and if that was accepted, it would cast doubt on their entire marriage and the prenuptial agreement. No matter how this impacted the case, advocacy groups would be furious. The governor would be forced to assign a special prosecutor, and with a confession on record, McCarthy would face serious consequences. Despite my hesitations, I might need to press charges that I knew weren't true, all to safeguard my job. I believed I was doing my job well, and I couldn't let everyone call for my head for defending people accused of heinous acts. I pointed to one of my aides, a woman I suspected worked closely with me. "Could someone bring me a coffee? Just black, please." Wilkes nodded, and the blonde-haired woman quickly left the room. I don't want to send an innocent man to prison, even if he might walk away with $10 million. But I also can't let all of you, I gestured towards Bailey and Wilkes, escape trouble for fraud, stealing $10 million, and other wrongdoings. I paced back towards the center of the room, then turned to face Bailey. "Let's think this through, Bailey. If McCarthy signs papers relinquishing any claim to that $10 million and agrees to a divorce, will you drop the other charges? Will you let him walk free?" Bailey looked pensive. "Those charges would vanish, and he can leave with $250,000, since Miss Lancaster has already agreed to that." Maitland stepped up, positioning himself behind Deirdre. "You said your husband hurt you." He made a formal statement. "Are you willing to forget that once he signs the papers? Do you plan to share this with women's rights groups for them to handle?" Deirdre merely shook her head. But Bailey interjected, "She'll let him go, and there won't be any more consequences. The last thing she wants is to dredge up those painful memories." Just then, the secretary returned with a blue coffee cup. Maitland took it, gulped it down quickly, then handed it back. He walked to the front of the room, pacing back to the back, which might have seemed dramatic, but I could tell he was genuinely contemplating the situation and the people involved. "I've made choices in this job that I never wanted to make," he admitted, his voice steady. "They've been hard decisions, but I knew they were the right ones. I know some see me as cold and tough. Some even think I enjoy making things difficult for others. Sometimes I do, but those are usually for people who deserve it. This situation, Mort, is challenging, but I understand why you acted the way you did. Mort," he continued, "you and Viviana don't have kids, right? Married for 40 years without children? You were Deirdre's godparents and held her when she was baptized. You probably spent as much time with her as Orion did before he passed away. Your relationship was more than just lawyer and client. When she came to you for help escaping her marriage and then the unfortunate accident happened that gave you a way to help her, I don't think you thought about money. I believe you acted out of care for her." He turned to Deirdre. "And you, Deirdre, you're really just guilty of trusting the wrong people. And you, McCarthy, you're just guilty of making bad choices. I don't want to do this. I truly don't. I've tried every way to avoid it, but I cannot ignore this behavior and let anyone escape responsibility. I may regret this." Taking out his cell phone, he dialed a number. "Hi, could I talk to Mr. Edwards? It's important." "Dallas, it's me. Yes, we need to move forward. Yes, I know he's your friend, but we have him, and they wouldn't budge. No leniency at all. I'd say there's an 85 to 90% chance of conviction. It's going to be a big case, corrupt lawyers, wealthy people, fraud, unfaithfulness. This might just become a massive story." He paused to listen to the voice on the other end of the line before handing the phone to Bailey. "He'd like to speak with you for a moment." Bailey took the phone and listened intently for a couple of minutes. When he returned it to Maitland, his expression was grave. "Only you? Serious?" he echoed, his brow furrowing. "Just arrange the funds, Mort. It's only $10 million. Stop this before it gets out of hand." Leaning closer to Deirdre, Bailey whispered urgently, "Gutman, you need to be quiet. This is your fault. If you hadn't been so selfish, this wouldn't have happened." But Deirdre was unfazed. "Nothing has changed. Why are you giving up now?" she shot back, glancing at me for a fleeting moment before quickly looking away. "Everything has changed, Deirdre. Edwards has let Maitland loose. He is relentless, and once he begins, he won't stop. I don't want you to face what's coming. Just give McCarthy the money. Your boyfriend will understand." She finally looked at me, her gaze strong and clear. "All right, Michael. You win. Take your $10 million and go. Let me be with the man I love, and that's not you." Bailey gestured for Wilkes, who stood up and left the room. "You'll have the money by tomorrow," he announced. "I want a cashier's check for $10 million in half an hour. I believe Hunt Bank can prepare a $10 million check and have it here quickly," Wilkes replied before the secretary followed him out. Maitland sat next to me, taking out his phone. "Our officers are leaving," he said quietly. "They're informing your staff that this was a very realistic training exercise about fraud for police and lawyers. You kindly played the role of the bad guys. Fairfax, you'll receive a certificate for your participation in this exercise. All records of today will be destroyed." Dr. Teller's voice resonated in the hushed conference room. "Mr. Wilson, you'll receive one as well." He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Bailey's team. "Mort, I trust your people will keep this exercise confidential. If any rumors leak, it could cause major issues for your firm's clients." Bailey nodded, his gaze sweeping over the tense faces in the room. "My team knows the importance of discretion." The air was thick with anticipation, and murmurs filled the silence as Deirdre chatted quietly with her new partner, exchanging quick, concerned glances. Maitland, absorbed in his phone, barely noticed the growing tension. Just then, a knock shattered the stillness. The door swung open, revealing a large officer who had previously assisted Harper Stevens. His left wrist was pressed against his chest, and bruises marred his face. "Feeling better now?" Mond asked, concern creeping into his tone. "Better than before," the officer replied, managing a weak smile. "You should see the other guy." He glanced at his arm, grimacing. "Speaking of which, I'm taking him to the hospital." "How's Matt?" Henry inquired, shifting in his seat. "I think I broke his leg," the officer grimaced. "His ankle's likely messed up too. He lost a couple of teeth and might have a concussion. Not intentional on my part, I assure you." He glanced down at his own injuries. A few broken ribs and possibly some missing teeth. Nothing too serious, though. He put up a good fight. "Are you guys ready to wrap this up?" Maitland asked, his voice laced with impatience. "Not exactly, but we're fine," the officer replied. "I need to get him to the hospital." Bailey gestured toward Matt Henry. "You go with them and ensure they understand this was an accident. Handle the paperwork and insurance." Henry nodded and exited the room. The waiting felt interminable, though only 35 minutes passed before another knock echoed through the room. Marge, the secretary, opened the door to reveal a hefty man with thick, salt and pepper hair. He carried a briefcase firmly attached to his wrist. "Mr. Bailey," he greeted, his voice deep and authoritative. "Davidson here. Thank you, Miss Hunt, for your swift and careful work." I couldn't help but notice the bulge under the left side of his coat. A second man in formal attire followed him, also concealing something beneath his coat. His sharp gaze told me he was private security. "Who should I hand this check to?" "You?" Davidson inquired. Bailey shook his head, pointing at me. Davidson settled in next to me and produced a key to unlock the briefcase. Inside, a thin business envelope awaited. He retrieved it and handed it over to me. "If you could open it, please, and verify that it's a cashier's check for $10 million. After that, I'll need you to sign a form confirming you've received it." With careful fingers, I opened the envelope, revealing a folded piece of paper. The front displayed a cashier's check with a large 1 followed by 7 zeros. On the back lay the necessary documentation. Even though I had expected this, it felt surreal. Just paper, yet it held more significance than it should. It was the stuff dreams are made of. I looked up at Davidson. He smiled at the check, but it seemed routine for him. I remembered his high-ranking position at Hunt Bank, where he regularly dealt with vast sums of money. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Gutman watching closely, his intense gaze scrutinizing every move. I found his reaction intriguing but knew I had to keep things moving. "All right, McCarthy, you've got your money," Bailey said, leaning forward. "Can you sign the paperwork so we can wrap this up? I'm in a celebratory mood. Could you fetch me a nice cigar and a lighter?" "For goodness sake, Mond, can you just get him out of here?" Bailey interjected, his frustration evident. "I don't know, Mort," Mond replied, glancing at me. "After today, can it hurt to let him enjoy a cigar? It's a big day for everyone." Mort waved dismissively, and a secretary hurried back with a cigar and a simple lighter. It was clear Mort wasn't thrilled with me. I'd spent time in both fancy and gritty places, but this felt different. I took a moment to savor the occasion, lighting the cigar with care. I flicked the lighter, holding the end of the cigar over the flame, letting it ignite. I inhaled the smoke, swirling it around before releasing it. It wasn't the finest cigar I'd ever had, but it wasn't the worst, either. It felt appropriate for the moment. As I puffed, the tip of the cigar glowed brighter. I picked up the check and held it near the flame, cautious not to burn myself. I sensed Davidson tensing behind me, ready to intervene, but he hesitated. After all, it was my $10 million. As the flames danced closer, they licked at the edge of the check, turning the pristine white paper into charred black with hints of red. The black ash drifted away, caught in the air like lost hopes. Someone had placed an ashtray nearby, and I held the check over it as it crumbled, bits falling into the glass receptacle. Once it was reduced to nothing but ashes, I dropped the last remnants into the ashtray, wiped my hands clean, and turned to Bailey. The room was silent, the air thick with shock and disbelief. "If you pass me the documents I need to sign, I'll complete them and leave you all alone," I said, my voice steady despite the tension. Bailey slid a stack of papers across the table. They moved smoothly, the 100 spots marked for my signature glaring at me. I could feel the weight of their stares as I wrote my name, finishing the last signature with a flourish. Looking up, I met Gutman's intense gaze, his expression a strange mix of anger and childlike surprise. I slid the papers back up the table and stood. This had been the longest day of my life, and I had places to be and things to do. As I turned to leave, Deirdre stood in my path. "I'm done, Mr. Mond. We're finished. I need to go." "McCarthy, don't just walk out like this," he insisted, his tone a mix of frustration and desperation. "That's kind of you, Mond. I didn't know you cared, but I have things to take care of," I replied, brushing past him. "I went out of my way for you, went against my better judgment, and let you lead the investigation so we couldn't talk about your wife. I should have taken Bailey and Wilkes down but let them go to make it easier for you. I allowed you to skip things I wouldn't permit anyone else to do." I took a breath, feeling the weight of his disappointment. "I put up with all that for a chance to find justice for a victim, and then you pull this?" He stepped back, allowing me to pass. "What's done is done," I said, determination flooding my voice. "I can't go after Bailey, Wilkes, or anyone else now. You're leaving with nothing, so can't you at least tell me why you did all this?" His eyes pleaded with me, a desperate search for understanding in his expression. But I was done. I had played my part, and now it was time to leave this chapter behind. I wanted to walk away without telling Dara the truth. Keeping that secret felt like the easiest option, but deep down, I knew he deserved to know. I pulled the tape recorder out of my pocket and, with a heavy heart, pressed play. The familiar sound of Dara's voice filled the room, her tone soft yet filled with tension. "Oh my God, Julie, you need to take it easy. I don't know if I can handle much more of this. I think you can manage. Just give me another 30 minutes and we'll see," I replied, my voice steady despite the strange noises crackling in the background. "You won't get that time if you keep making those sounds," she teased, a hint of laughter breaking through the anxiety. "You taste really good. I wish I didn't have to go back to the hotel tonight." "When is Oil Boy coming back?" I asked, desperate to change the subject. "Tomorrow. He's supposed to be back tomorrow, but he sometimes comes back early. That's why you need to leave tonight." "Why do we have to keep sneaking around? Just end things with him. We could be together openly." "Julie, you know why I can't. If I end things tomorrow, he gets the 10 million, and you're the one who wants to protect that." "No way. I know it doesn't mean much to you, but 10 million is a lot. He can't just take that away. Uncle Mort is trying to find a way to help us. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. If he's gone, we wouldn't have to worry about the money." "No, come on. He'll be back soon, and if something happens..." "It's over for us," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I know people who could help us, for a price. All our problems would be gone." "No, Julie," she said sharply. "I've told you before, don't even think like that." "Why not?" "It seems easy. Because I won't hurt anyone, and I won't let you do it either. Michael isn't a bad person. It's not his fault that I don't love him. He cares about me." "All right, just thinking out loud. I wouldn't actually do anything." "Don't you need to know something? There are recording devices all over the house and property. Dad had them installed. If anything happens to Michael, if he's in an accident or anything, I'll take those recordings to the police. I'll tell them about our conversations." "You're serious? You would turn me into the police?" "I wouldn't want to," she said, her voice trembling. "I care about you, and I want us to have a future together. It would break my heart, but I would do it. I want you to understand, I'm serious about this. You'd do that even if it meant facing trouble too. Do you think they would believe I acted alone? You would lie about me. I've made mistakes. I came back to you even after promising my father I wouldn't. I've made choices that I regret. How could you do that? How can sending me away for wanting a better future be fair? Not by hurting someone. Don't say that name. Please, just stop. It's painful. Let it go. Look at me," I insisted. "I can see your face change when you say his name. Be honest with me. Do you still have feelings for him? Please, just stop. You're hurting me. Be honest. If you still care for him, I can't promise I won't react. Send me away if you need to. I can't ignore this. Stop denying it. I know how you feel. I've sensed it for a long time. I dislike every moment you spend with him. I just don't get it. He's a good guy. We've had a bond for 2 years, being close like that naturally brings feelings. Do I care for him? Maybe. But not the same way I care for you. You were my first love, and you'll always mean a lot to me. You have to trust that. Make me believe it." "Oh, I think I can do that." With that, I hit the stop button, my eyes glued to the recorder, avoiding the intense gaze of Dara. "You're still in love with me," she said softly, her voice filled with sadness. I finally looked up and saw the pity I had dreaded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not in love with you, Dara. I stopped feeling that way the moment I heard you with him. But you were willing to risk so much for me." I couldn't just let you go after that, I replied, desperation creeping into my voice. I glanced over at Wilson, who nodded at me, his expression serious. Thank you for your help, I said, reaching out to Maitland, who shook my hand firmly. Thank you for everything, Mr. Maitland. I hope that answered your questions. Yeah, where are you going now? Leaving this place. I doubt I'll see you again. Good luck. I approached the door, and as I paused, I turned to Dara one last time. Don't try to reach out to me again. If you need anything, just don't. If something happens, don't ask anyone to contact me. It's better for both of us if we go our separate ways. With those final words hanging in the air, I walked out the door. Within 3 hours, I had left the continental United States. April 17, 2009. Luis nodded at me from behind the bar, a familiar face in a place that felt both strange and comforting. It was a Friday night, but many regulars hadn't shown up. Guatemala, especially near the port cities like Puerto Barrios, was going through a rough patch. The American Depression of 2008 hit Central American economies hard, resembling a serious recession. The shipping industry that once supported Puerto Barrios had taken a nosedive, leaving bars like Luis's El Dorado struggling to get by. Once filled with locals and American tourists, it was now a ghost of its former self. My friends and I were trying to keep Luis's place afloat. The drinks were good, the vibe was lively, and the poker games were always a source of excitement. We'd sit around tables, laughing and sharing stories, trying to ignore the troubles outside. The world felt a little brighter when you were surrounded by friends, even in a place where whispers of economic despair echoed in the background. Hey, Maria. I called out to a lovely bartender with a warm smile. She was a beacon in this dimly lit bar, her laughter mixing with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation. Don't take too long, she warned in her accented English, her eyes sparkling with mischief. How could I stay away from you? I replied playfully in Spanish, making her smile even brighter. As I excused myself from a poker game with some local players, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. Poker was a way to unwind, but the stakes were high in more ways than one. We kept our bets low, careful not to irritate the locals. They were friendly as long as their luck didn't turn too badly, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something might go wrong, especially with Maria's connections. I was drawn to her, eager to explore the chemistry that sparked between us. There were rooms upstairs at good prices, and I could easily envision the night unfolding with her by my side. But as I gazed into her eyes, I couldn't escape the thought that my past was still looming large, a shadow threatening to overshadow any happiness I might find. Would I be able to escape the consequences of my choices, or was I destined to be haunted by them forever? The atmosphere in the bar was electric, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses mingling with the low hum of conversations. I found myself seated at a table, my mind drifting as I took in the scene around me. Lou, the bartender, seemed older than his years, with a long face and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too much. People are looking for you, he said, his voice a mixture of concern and curiosity. When someone was looking for me, it could mean many things, most of them were not good. I preferred to keep my head down and stay out of other people's affairs, but trouble often found a way to rear its ugly head, especially in business. Some folks wanted quick fixes for their financial woes instead of patiently working through their issues. Philosophical thinkers in business were few and far between, both north and south of the border. In the US and Canada, dissatisfied business people often resorted to legal notices, while down south, it was common to send in intimidating individuals instead. 2 Americans are here, well-dressed, Lou continued. One is an older man, big and dark-haired, the other is younger, with silver hair. They might as well wear signs that say rich North Americans. He scoffed, rolling his eyes. They probably won't cause trouble for long, but they've got 3 bodyguards with them. One of those guys is huge and incredibly intimidating. Now that caught my interest. I didn't think this was who I expected, but it felt strange. "Anything else?" I asked, my instincts kicking in. "They're spending money freely, so it won't be long before they come over here." I reached into a hidden pouch in my money belt, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. I'd already given him a generous tip, but down here, it was polite to return a favor with cash. "Thanks, Lou," I said, handing him the bill. He shrugged, a nonchalant smile on his face. "You're welcome." As I walked back to my table, Ben Overhauser intercepted me. He had been with my crew for about 5 years, always reliable and quick to back me up. "What's going on?" he asked, scanning the room. "Not sure. 2 Americans are looking for me, and they're accompanied by 3 bodyguards. Should we stay here or get out? Let's find out who they are before we meet them. Do you think you know them?" "I think I do, but I'm not sure why they're here." A sense of dread crept over me. I didn't want to entertain the possibility that something serious had happened to Deirdre, that the company thought I should be informed. I had tried to leave that past behind, but the memories still haunted me. Despite wishing her misfortune over the years, I never wanted the worst for her. As Mont had said, maybe I was just being foolish. I settled back down at the table, allowing the lively atmosphere and the animated conversations around me to pull me away from my darker thoughts. The dealer announced that a new hand was ready. About $100 in small bills and some loose change were scattered across the table. We never played for too much. Macario's group understood that if they tried to raise the stakes too high, we would simply walk away from the game and resume drinking. Keeping the money on the table manageable was a necessity. Overhauser was always prepared. He kept specialized gear for different situations and was known for being reliable during high-stakes moments. I could see the Glock 31 semi-automatic tucked into his shoulder holster, and the bandolier he wore was stocked with extra bullets. In the 5 years we'd known each other, he'd rarely needed to draw his weapon, but he looked tough and ready for anything. Ray Wendell, another member of our group, had a Mossberg 500 shotgun that worked well for settling disputes in tight spaces. He also carried a Glock 17 liters pistol and a Sig Sauer P320 on his side. As for me, I had an FNX 45 revolver that held 16 powerful rounds and could be fired without being drawn from its holster. I also carried a small Bond Ranger Derringer that packed 2 formidable shots. I had only had to use my weapon once in the past year during a serious situation, but I always remained vigilant. Life in Guatemala wasn't as wild as it might seem from the description, but we kept a strong front. As I took another sip of whiskey, Macario shared his stories of bad luck at the table, the tough economy, and the struggles of working men in Guatemala. His friends chimed in occasionally, and I could sense they appreciated my understanding of their challenges. As the night wore on, more patrons flowed in and out of the bar, including some gang members who drifted through, adding a touch of unease to the atmosphere. But it was bearable, especially with Maria by my side, whispering sweet nothings to me. I knew I was merely a source of income for her, yet I couldn't deny the effect she had on me. "Another shot of whiskey, please," I requested as she walked away. I made a small gesture to Overhauser and Wendell, pointing to my white gold Rolex, signaling that it was time to wrap things up and head out. I noticed Macario eyeing my watch with interest, and I realized it wasn't wise to flaunt something so valuable in front of someone who might want to take it. My father had always dreamed of owning a watch like mine but never found the right moment to purchase one, even when he had the funds. When I could finally afford it, I bought it without hesitation and had worn it proudly for 5 years. I wouldn't take it off unless absolutely necessary. Macario smiled at me, but it didn't feel genuine. It was more of a calculated look. He wanted what I had and was likely contemplating the cost of trying to take it from me. "Michael McCarthy, you're hard to find," a voice called out, breaking my reverie. The noise in the bar faded as Overhauser and Wendell kept a watchful eye on Macario and his crew. I turned to see Hugh Davidson and Matt Henry standing by the bar. A few steps behind Henry were Harper Stevens and two imposing figures who appeared to be bodyguards. Macario and his men eyed the newcomers with suspicion. Davidson and Henry exuded an air of wealth that caught everyone's attention. I knew I had to get them out of there before things escalated. I hurried over to them, trying to maintain my composure despite the unease bubbling beneath the surface. "Davidson, Henry, it's been a while. Why don't you join us at our hotel so we can discuss what brings you here?" Davidson extended his hand for a shake. "That's fine, we didn't want to disturb your work." As we shook hands, I noticed the expensive briefcase he carried was handcuffed to his wrist. At that moment, everything felt suspended in time. I glanced back at Macario, who had noticed the handshake too. He yelled for his men while drawing his weapon. Suddenly, the bar erupted into chaos, glass shattered, voices rose in panic, and the atmosphere shifted from lively to frenzied in an instant. My heart raced as I realized we were all in a dangerous game now, one where the stakes had just escalated beyond what anyone had anticipated. Shouts and chaos erupted around me as I pushed Davidson out of harm's way, hoping he'd seek safety among the crowd. I quickly pulled out my weapon, adrenaline coursing through my veins, firing as fast as I could. Time felt as if it had slowed to a crawl. Macario staggered back, his shots going wide as panic filled the air. I heard Maria scream and drop to the ground, clearly accustomed to this kind of danger. Wendell readied his shotgun, his eyes sharp as one of Macario's men aimed his weapon at him. With a thunderous blast, Wendell fired, sending the smaller man crashing against the bar's wall. Gunfire erupted between Harper Stevens, his bodyguards, and more of Macario's crew. The sound of bullets whizzing through the air mingled with the cries of those caught in the crossfire. Just then, Overhauser, who had taken a fall earlier, began firing an assault rifle. The roar of his weapon filled the back of the bar, creating a cacophony that drowned out everything else. As the chaos unfolded, the scene around me began to crystallize. I saw Macario slam against the wall before he took a hit himself. Some of his men stumbled, but then everything went eerily quiet. I noticed people crying, some trying to help others up, while I turned my attention to Davidson, whom I had pushed to the ground. He still held a gun aimed directly at me, and instinct kicked in. I rolled to the side just as Davidson fired several shots at the spot where I had been standing. Finally, he lowered his weapon, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But as I glanced back toward the chaos, another member of Macario's group collapsed, his gun slipping from his fingers. "Sorry, McCarthy," I heard Davidson say, the tension still thick in the air. "I saw him and didn't have time to warn you," I replied, my heart racing. "I'm glad you reacted quickly," Davidson said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around us. Harper Stevens approached the fallen man, rolling him onto his back. He glanced at Davidson, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Did you serve in the military, Mr. Davidson?" "Long ago," Davidson replied, his tone calm. "You must still know your stuff. Those shots were dead on. I don't know many who could pull that off in a tough spot. You could have been my bodyguard." "I deal with tricky situations for the bank," Davidson explained, his voice low. "I've had training for emergencies. I was a military officer in Berlin in the 70s. I guess it comes naturally now." Luis peeked over the bar, his expression serious as he took in the chaos. "You owe me, McCarthy," he said, glancing at the bodies sprawled on the floor.